Okay, good evening. Welcome to the Board of Education meeting. It's Tuesday, June 19th. The board has been in closed session since 6 o'clock for matters of collective negotiating between the public body and its employees or their representatives, or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees, the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body, the purchase or lease of real property for the use of the public body, including meetings held for the purpose of discussing whether a particular parcel should be acquired, the setting of a price or sale or lease of property owned by the public body, litigation when an action against, affecting, or on behalf of the particular public body has been filed and is pending before a court or administrative tribunal, or when the public body finds that an action is probable or imminent, in which case the basis for finding shall be recorded and entered into minutes of closed session meeting. Discussion of minutes of lawfully closed under the Open Meetings Act, whether for purposes of approval by the body of the minutes or semi-annual review of the minutes as mandated by section 2.06. Okay, we have 7 board members present, and let's stand. And tonight we have the IC Troop 77 to Boy Scout Troop to lead the pledge. So if they want to come up and maybe stand over there or kind of in the middle, be great. And you can lead us in the pledge. So everyone rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, so tonight we get to start with the great part of the meeting. We have 3 recognitions tonight. So the first one is the Euro Challenge Midwest Regional Competition. So if those, if Tamara, Carl, and the students that participate in that would come up to the, near the in the middle here, we'll recognize you.
Where a team of 3 to 5 students represent their regions in advanced economic analysis of implementation of fiscal and monetary policies to solve problems in the Euro area and specifically within a country within the European Union. What is so special about this competition is that this analysis of the Euro area is not taught specifically in our AP economics courses or history courses, but rather to excel to the level of qualifying at the national level, students must present at a level equal to our top economic advisors. Samantha Cruz, Emily Dow, Brian Kelly, Emmett McGovern, Matt Kentra, Allison Splitstone, and Matthew Splitstone are 7 York students who took on the Euro Challenge with dedication and energy to their fullest potential. Prior to the first round of competition, they met on weekends and after school to put together their monetary policy solution to help lower the high unemployment rate of Italy. Fiscal policy and monetary policy were just being taught in class. So the challenging concepts that they were learning about Italy were much learned on their own. Their dedication to grasping the concepts to be able to apply them to the presentation was impressive. Members of the community, such as Mr. Welts, advised them on their presentation. After the first round, when they won for our region, they knew that they needed to make some changes to their presentation to compete against the prestigious teams heading to the national competition. They met in my classroom. They met outside of school. They met through Google Docs. A community member, Lucia Schmidt, introduced us to her nephew, an Italian economist, Mr. Antonucci. And so we met him on Skype and also through email, where he also helped us to be able to learn more about the Italian economy. Every step of the way, they asked what they could do to make it better. This says a lot about the type of dedicated and focused students that they are. To the parents in District 205, it is very fortunate to have such supportive parents. You opened up your homes for the kids to meet. You made sure that the kids had whatever they needed for our trip to New York City. At both competitions, we had to turn our phones in, and you patiently waited until we could tell you the final results. To make it to the semifinal round, it is an honor that only a selected few teams can achieve. The students received feedback from judges that showed they were impressed with their high level of knowledge and presentation skills. They represented York High School in the national competition with York pride. Not only did they make a big impression for themselves, but these students have established York High School as a top competitor in the Euro Challenge national competition.
So first of all, congratulations. And it was really nice to hear how you got to the national competition, because you clearly went above and beyond just the, little bits of practice. You had to do a lot on your own. So that is quite an accomplishment. So thank you, because we all get the honor, even though you went and did all the work, we all get the honor that York High School made it to that competition. So thank you for that. So I'm going to read this kind of formal proclamation to honor you, which may seem a little repetitive, but I think it's important for you to hear the words again and experience the pride and honor from the community. So, whereas the Euro Challenge is a program of the delegation of the European Union to the United States that supports this innovative academic competition to encourage American students to learn about the European Union and its single currency. Whereas on March 23rd, 2018, the Euro Challenge Midwest Regional Competition took place at the Illini Center, hosted by Illinois European Union Center, the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, and WISE, comprised of teams representing Illinois, Indiana, and Minnesota, with student teams either in 9th or 10th grade. And whereas the York team chose the challenge of presenting a 15-minute presentation on Italy's high unemployment rate using monetary policy in front of a panel of judges from the Federal Reserve of Chicago and the University of Illinois at Chicago's Center of Economic Education. And whereas the York team, consisting of high school sophomores who could come back 2 more years to get this honor, Samantha Cruz, Emily Dow, Brian Kelly, Matthew Kentra, Emmett McGovern, Allie Splitstone, and Matthew Splitstone, emerged in first place in the Midwest Regional Challenge. And whereas, according to team coach Tamara Carl, at the competition we realized there were multiple schools that had chosen Italy as their country, but our students' preparation and ability to confidently answer the follow-up questions made them stand out above the other teams. Whereas the Midwest win qualified the team for the semifinal round of the National Challenge at the New York Federal Reserve Bank, competing against 10 regions across the country with a total of 24 teams competing. And whereas this accomplishment brings great pride and prestige to York Community High School, to District 205, and to the community. So now, Therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205 express great congratulations to these students, their parents, and the team coach, Tamara Carl. Advanced Placement Micro, Advanced Placement Macroeconomics, and American Government teacher at York for this very outstanding accomplishment. Congratulations.
Kara, sorry, can I make a recommendation? Can we, as a board, come up?
Yes, that would be
Yes.
fantastic. So I'm going to give you this.
Congratulations. Thank you so much. How many years in a row?
Yeah.
Thank you.
You were just fantastic. Thank you.
How's everything going?
Great.
Congratulations. Is she done?
No, she'll be a senior.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Great job. Congratulations.
There you go. Thank you. Okay, next is the Illinois Economics Challenge. If you could come up to the center.
For this one, I'm sorry to say they're all seniors, and so we could only get one to come back. So thanks for coming. Otherwise, I'd be up here by myself. So this is Jason Kentra. The Economics Challenge is a prestigious competition where only students that have taken an AP, IB, or honors level economics course are eligible to participate in this competition. These students represent some of the highest achieving students in the country. These students scored in the top 10 teams of all in Illinois to compete in the state finals. The competition forces students to demonstrate a deep level of knowledge and understanding of college-level micro and macroeconomics. The intensity of the competition is difficult to replicate in this setting, but it's so exciting to see the intensity of these young professionals as they work collaboratively to problem solve. The final round of the competition is a buzzer round between the two finalists in front of a panel of prestigious judges. It's truly nerve-wracking, fast, and intense. York's second place team, consisting of Hannah Cronin, Courtney Jopes, Jason Kentra, and Anshul Shah, handled this with professional and ease and focus. Leading into the final buzzer round, they scored perfect scores in the micro and international rounds, placing them in first place. They're a special group of students. They worked very hard together to prepare for the state competition. It wasn't something that just based upon what was learned in class, they could just walk into the competition and perform at the level that they did. This is a true testament to their depth of knowledge and understanding of the material. They worked together as a team, and they encouraged each other when a mistake was made. They were quick to the buzzer and eloquent in their answers. The buzzer round went down to the very last question. And a special congratulations to Jason Kentra. So I'm so glad you're here. He has competed in the competition buzzer round for 3 years in a row. I had Jason when he was a sophomore in AP Micro and AP Macro. To maintain that level of AP economic knowledge is impressive and one that's going to be very hard to beat. In addition to placing second, York's team of Matt Anderson, Lene Dirkscheid, Sean Hayes, and Ashley Kunish placed fifth in the state competition also. Congratulations. I'm truly proud of you and have been so happy to have worked with you.
Thank you, and congratulations. What an accomplishment. And I'd like to take 1 second just to thank Mrs. Carl. I know my son had her, and I will say it serves you well in college because he got a letter from his department chair in economics congratulating him on his performance in college, attributed back to the work that Mrs. Carl does. So thank you very much. And congratulations to you as well. So let me read the proclamation. Whereas the Illinois Economic Challenge is an annual competition for teams of high school students in which their knowledge of economics is tested and is designed to recognize students who demonstrate high levels of comprehension and application of honors or advanced placement economics concepts and skills. And whereas on April 13th, 2018, at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, 10 teams of 4 students advanced to the 2018 Illinois Economic Challenge State Finals, the championship event consisting of individual and team written tests, a critical thinking activity that required addressing an economic scenario and advising a finance sector volunteer judge on how to address the problems, and whereas the team of Jason Kentra, Hannah Cronin, Courtney Jobs, and Anshul Shah represented York Community High School in the state finals, competing against finalists from Stevenson, Hinsdale South, Edwardsville, and Neuqua Valley High Schools, as well as St. Ignatius College Prep, Buffalo Grove, and even a second team from York. And whereas the final Quiz Bowl round of competition against Buffalo Grove High School concluded with this York Community High School team advancing ahead of 8 competing student teams to earn second place in the state competition. And whereas this York team, represented by teacher and coach Tamara Carl, received a trophy and frame certificate to be displayed at York High School, individual medals and certificates, as well as a cash award. And whereas these accomplishments bring pride and prestige to York Community High School, to District 205, and to the community. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205 express congratulations to these students, their parents, and the team coach, Tamara Carl, Advanced Placement Micro, Advanced Placement Macroeconomics, and American Government teacher at York for these outstanding accomplishments. Congrats.
Okay, our next recognition is the Science Olympiad State Competition. Mr. Paschke, are you here?
I'm not prepared to be Mr. Paschke tonight. So let me say that I think that the Science Olympiad is part of a culture of curiosity that we try to build in the school district. And just like the kids play soccer every day in the streets of Rio or Senegal or maybe even the tough streets of Sweden, and then they all get together, and that whole culture of playing all day every day turns into the World Cup. Well, the Science Olympiad's like that. These are curious kids. They're always honing their skills. They're always competing. They're always getting after it. And it makes all of us a better educational culture because they're doing that. And so when they get together and they compete, you get the best of the best going up against each other. And when they get a result like these kids, it's something special. So I'm going to read the proclamation now, where you'll get more of the detail that Mr. Paschke was supposed to deliver tonight that I'm unprepared for. But I think this total recognition reflects that these are some accomplished kids who went out there, and among very accomplished kids, they did very well. So let me read this. Whereas Science Olympiad is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the quality of K-12 science education, increasing male, female, and minority interest in science, creating a technologically literate workforce, and providing recognition for outstanding achievement by both students and teachers. And whereas the Science Olympiad goal is to create a passion for learning science by supporting elementary and secondary Science Olympiad tournaments at school, district, county, state, and national levels, with an emphasis on teamwork and commitment to excellence. And whereas Science Olympiad also has the goal of improving the quality of K-12 science education throughout the nation by changing the way science is perceived and the way it is taught, with an emphasis on problem solving and hands-on, minds-on, constructivist learning practices, while promoting partnerships among community, business, industry, government, and education. And whereas on April 20th, 2018, the York Community High School Science Olympiad team finished in 8th place overall at the state championship at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. And whereas the following York Community High School students earned top positions in the competition categories as noted. Dynamic Planet, first place, Grant Hartledge and Peter Hartledge. Fermi Questions, second place, Grant Hartledge and Peter Hartledge. Write It, Do It, third place, Eric Doberstein and Christian Glossner. And whereas these accomplishments bring pride and prestige to York Community High School, to District 205, and to the community, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205 express congratulations to these students, their parents, and their York High School coaches, Jeff Drock, Elizabeth Farhadi, and Jeremy Paschke, for their outstanding achievements. Congratulations.
Okay, next we're going to do our report and presentation for tonight, which is the Future Focused Community Engagement Report. And we'll do our public comments after the presentation before any votes are taken.
Good evening. Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie Rogers, and this is Marcia Sutter, and we are here as the communications consultants who've been spending time working on how to best communicate some of the options under the draft master facility plan. And we are here tonight to present the results of the qualitative research findings that we have worked on this spring. We held a number of meetings over the month of May. We're going to go through what we talked about at each meeting, what we learned, what we heard, and it's our goal tonight to really give you a snapshot of what we heard from the community that we talked to about the master facility plan and options. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you're doing great.
All right, so again, the purpose of tonight's presentation, we're going to review the research, the goals, the methodology, the themes, and also we compiled some of the community information requests. So in addition to doing some listening and taking notes, we also took a lot of notes about what people wanted more information on, so we can turn around and get more information and additional communications to people as we get more details. And finally, we'll wrap up with questions and discussions. But of course, if you have a question, please let us know while we're going through this as well. So you may have seen this before. This slide should look familiar to you because we've shared it in the past. The gray items 1 through 5 have been accomplished. And tonight what we are presenting on are the bolded items in 6 and 7. So really the community engagement, that qualitative research information, and the mailings of focus groups, community meetings, and then today we're here to report these communications to you all. And you'll notice that, the listing means, you'll notice too that there's some items on here that are for consideration for future dates, such as conducting a phone poll to talk about what the larger community might think, and perhaps adding a thought exchange online survey process to continue the process of gathering more information once some narrowed down options are on the table. And so how do we communicate these meetings? We had a pretty short time frame, but we really used all the different communications tools that the district is already using, such as Talk 205, social media. We had a mail district annual report that had the large community meeting dates out there. So we really tried to get as much information out as possible. We know springtime can be a little tricky to get people to come to meetings, but there was some good engagement. People are interested in the project and hearing about how the district is really planning for its facility usage and what your thoughts are about how you're going to move forward in the future. A lot of this collateral, we had some large boards that were done in partnership with White & Company as well. So the community engagement goals and outcomes really was a dual purpose. So this was, while a lot of the work has done and really built upon the first round of work with Focus 205, this was really the next iteration of that. So sharing the draft master facility plan, gathering feedback. We were at different schools and communities really looking for, are there any push points here? What kind of information do we need to go out and find more about? Just a reminder that when we present this information that you'll see the feedback was qualitative, so this was what people are thinking and hearing. It's not that representative poll like when I was here last time when I saw you in December I think it was, giving you kind of that scientific study of what the community thinks about topics. This was really an opt-in, so primarily parents attended, and you'll see from the results that those are the people who gave their opinions. But this qualitative data is useful in community engagement because we really, like I said earlier, got kind of a snapshot of where you are and where people are. So we can gauge some trends, identify topics, and again, we're building FAQs, which are online now, and as a way to kind of continue engaging and informing people about some of the issues. So the community meetings were the largest meetings that we had, kind of the big events. These were published in the annual report, and they were held at Bryan, Churchville, Sandburg, and York. And we'll go into what exactly was published at each of these and what we heard at each one. We had the school-based meetings, and this was where the master facility plan highlights and site-specific details were given, and it was an opportunity to give as many parents as possible the opportunity to really see the plans for their neighborhood schools. Parents were encouraged to attend different community meetings, informational sessions. We know that some parents actually attended more than one meeting. And the format in the middle school meetings was similar to the community meetings and held on the same evening as some of the community meetings, so feedback you'll see is incorporated from all of these. We really tried to get to as many school communities as possible in a short amount of time to really get feedback from different audiences. And now I'm going to set it over to Marcia.
So the one thing, just going back to that previous page, you'll see that Madison wasn't included, no listening session, middle school meeting, or information session. So those parents were actually encouraged to attend a meeting in their local elementary school or middle school district. So they were not ignored, just they're part of the larger community. So you're probably wondering, 4 kinds of meetings, why? How did all of that work? So basically the focus and length of the presentation varied. At the community meetings, it was the full presentation. At the listening sessions, middle school meetings, and information sessions, the presentation was shorter, and then there were additional slides about what was going to happen at each of those schools. Only two to three slides for each of those schools. What was really different, though, was how we gathered information at these meetings. So at the every school had a gallery walk, which is a display of the posters that you guys have seen. There was a district note taker at all of the meetings, but it was a different note taker at all of the information sessions. There were facilitated large group discussions at the listening sessions at Edison, Lincoln, and Field. And then at the community meetings, we actually took the time to do small group table discussions. So that is, I think most of you had an opportunity to observe at least one. There was a discussion guide, a note taker, and a leader at each table, and then we collected all of the notes afterwards, and we also encouraged all the groups to share out. You'll be hearing more about that in a little bit. And at those large meetings, we also collected emails and did an exit survey. There was no Q&A at those meetings. We were trying to keep them to 2 hours, but there was Q&A at all of the smaller listening sessions, middle school meetings, and information sessions. Because there were so many meetings in just the 1 month, we were able to make it to the community meetings, the listening sessions, and the middle school meetings, which occurred on the same evenings and days as the community meetings, but not to all of the school-specific information sessions, which is why the fact that there were different note takers enters into this project. So we've actually covered most of this. Notes were taken by district employees at all the meetings. We also gave everyone file cards so attendees could share additional comments and questions, maybe things that they didn't want to share in public or that weren't included in the discussion guide. And I think we've kind of covered. Table notes were recorded, collected, and reviewed. People shared their findings. And at the community meetings, we asked everyone to have similar discussions at their tables. Why did we do that? So we could kind of gauge the trends in the comments that they made. So this allowed people not only to state their own opinions, but we tried to ask people not to sit with their friends, so they would hear alternative points of view. So that's a great way for people to understand the perspective of other community members, which is something that you really want at this point in the conversation. So the 3 questions that we asked them to discuss were, are you more in favor of doing only maintenance and repairs, doing maintenance and repairs and enhancing security, or do you prefer one of the future-ready options? They were given a sheet that showed all 8 options, the continuum in pricing. They had that available to them on their tables, and it had already been presented by Dr. Moyer. We also encouraged them to have a conversation about facility parity. How important is it to your community that all of your K through 8 schools have similar facilities, opportunities for students to access the educational plan so that they're coming to York High School with somewhat of a level playing field? And then we asked them to discuss the pros and cons of boundary adjustments in general and provide feedback on the options that were presented that evening. Again, we gave them maps so that they could really have a tool in their hand. These are pretty robust presentations, so we wanted to make sure that they weren't relying on their memory to get through that. And then when they were sharing out, we asked them which question sparked the most conversation at their tables, and what would you like the Board of Education to know about your table's conversation. And those of you who've been out in the Elmhurst community may or may not be surprised to learn that boundaries definitely sparked the most conversation. But in general, people came out and talked about preferring moving forward, going toward the future-ready options versus just maintaining the status quo. They were very concerned about safety and security, but that wasn't the main thing they talked about. So who attended these meetings? You actually had pretty good turnout when you have nothing on the ballot. 386 people in total, 209 at those 4 community meetings, which means that 209 people got that exit survey. And what did we learn? They were primarily parents, future parents, and predominantly female, possibly due, to some of the meetings being held right around school pickup and drop-off time. So in your packet, you can see that the community meetings, no surprise, that were more publicized were better attended. So this is a Wordle. I don't know if you're familiar with these. I'm guessing you are. They're a graphic representation of how often a word appears in either a document or a collection of notes. This particular one is based on the notes that the district employees took at these 12 meetings. So boundaries, biggest one there of all. We've got some words that you shouldn't be surprised to see: kids, students, wants, plans, referendum, construction, schools. So it was interesting to me, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, even though parity was such a 1/3 of the questions, it clearly boundaries eclipses that by a large amount. And then referendum, construction, all-day kindergarten. Again, it's just a really quick way, instead of doing a frequency analysis, of getting at what really concerned people. Lincoln, you can see, is the biggest school word on there, and they were definitely, that meeting was well attended. So what did we hear? So that was just based on the notes that were taken by the district note takers. What we heard is a compilation of what those note takers took, the table notes that we collected at the end of the discussions, the facilitator notes, that would be our notes, exit surveys, and those file cards that we talked about. So this is all of that qualitative data. And what we learned was that moving forward is preferred to maintaining the status quo. And again, let's remember, this is qualitative research. Those 386 people, primarily parents. Security is a high priority. People wondered, could this be done first? So we answered that question in the FAQs. People want to keep students walking to school, preferably the school closest to their home. If they walk now, they should be able to walk tomorrow. There were a number of people who commented with the boundary options that were shared to them that they could actually see a school from their own home, and they might be asked to have their children still walk to school, but maybe a mile away, and that was a big concern. Starting all-day kindergarten sooner is very desirable. Many people asked if this could be accomplished with an all-day kindergarten center. People also noted that when we did the scientific poll in the fall, no timeline was attached to the all-day kindergarten question. So there was some thought that perhaps if they had known the timeline, they might have answered differently. Tax impact, always important when you're considering putting an initiative on the ballot. Comments really varied. At the meetings, most people who spoke out loud thought that the potential impact was minimal. When we read through the comments on the survey, a little bit more concern bubbled up, and I would say that's something that we see pretty frequently. In a public setting, you might not care to say that you're concerned about the tax impact, but in a more private setting, you might be. But again, most questions and most comments did not revolve around the financial impact. They revolved around keeping students walking to school, safety and security, and starting all-day kindergarten sooner.
Yeah, and looking at what we heard from the community meetings, really it's not all that different from what we saw with our poll last fall. That there was interest in action, that there's interest, a lot of interest in all-day kindergarten. We know about safety and security. Remembering the poll too, there's definitely some tax sensitivity that we saw within the community, but I think it's worth finding out more information about what that push point might be and what people are willing to support and interested in.
So we also looked at all those comments in a slightly different way, which was what information did the community request?
Yeah.
What do they want to learn? What else should the district be providing? So for sure, number one, timelines, the full project from design to completion. Parents very interested in what's going to happen at their school, specifically what year might the construction take place, so they can figure out which of their students might be impacted. And of course, at the schools that are either receiving or possibly sending students to another location, really want some information about student relocation. So that would include, what year will my students be relocated? Will the students from the two schools that are occupying one school be mixed, or will they be kept separate? So those are the details. They also want to know more about what's going to happen at their sites. Even though we had school-specific meetings, we did not have renderings or plans. They'd like to know where will specific features like media centers be located, how many rooms be renovated, how will it look, how will current and new construction be blended together, and going back to those timelines, when will the work take place? We've already talked that people really want to know about boundaries, and we know that the plans have evolved since people saw them at these meetings, but they would very much like grandfathering details to be confirmed. Is it for my children who are here now, or is it for all, it kind of runs the gamut, and that might be something you'd like to have some more community conversations about. So we're giving you the top 10 concerns about boundaries, and I'm not going to read them all to you. People really want to know, what's the plan? A number of people commented that combining this boundary adjustment with a referendum could be problematic for some people. So that's coming from your community, not from Leslie and me. So walk today, walk tomorrow. Students should go to the school closest to their home. Lots of questions around how the middle school boundaries will be impacted, because the maps that we were sharing really just showed the elementary school boundaries, and there may be some impact. We talked about grandfathering. Little bit unclear to the community, how would this impact or lower class size? Could we, if students are already bused, does it make sense to have them be the ones who change schools? Lots of questions about, could this impact my property values negatively? Parameters, who makes this decision? Is this something that's going to be voted upon? So, and then number 10, I think, is just a great demonstration of the yin and yang of qualitative research. It's not scientific. Lots of people ask, could there be more choice areas in your district? Curiously, and I went through and looked at all these, half the people said they wanted more choice, and half the people said they thought choice causes problems. So that's the yin and yang. Choice areas, we could just have listed that as number 10, but it's interesting to know that people are just sort of split on that. Parity. We asked this question. It wasn't explored at site-specific meetings, just at those big community meetings. We spent some time on this topic because we think it's extremely important to district messaging. When you have 13 buildings in your district, you're kind of spending necessarily disproportionately on the buildings to bring them all up to a similar level. You have to explain that to people in a way that makes it palatable to them. So that's why we explored this idea of parity. Would that be an effective referendum message for you? And people did agree it was an important concept. They liked the idea that that students would have similar opportunities and experiences before they got to York High School. And then they had questions about, how is this possible if some buildings are new and others are not? So a little bit of explaining how those refreshed and bigger media centers will be in each school. Lots of agreement that there should definitely be curricular parity across the district, even though we did not ask specifically about curriculum. And people did note that the PTAs provide different levels of support. So I'm going to turn this over to Leslie and hope somebody might give us a glass of water. Or I'll actually just go get our water bottles.
Okay. So onto program and school-specific comments and concerns. So these were some ideas that were mentioned frequently and aren't on the other slides. But you can see some of the ones that are mentioned. Thank you. Is that all-day kindergarten came up again. And so the question being, now that we know we might have to wait for all-day kindergarten and we'd like it sooner, are there other trade-offs? Might a central site be more preferable, even though we know originally people wanted all-day kindergarten in their neighborhood schools? There were other questions about could Lincoln be bigger to house more students? Questions about the logistics of Edison moved for a year. I think Marcia mentioned that question about will classes be blended or separate, and how does that work to go into a school and then back out of a school? Questions around Fisher and dual language impacted that program there. Definitely this is a community that values small class sizes, and there were also questions around impact fees and TIF funding, questions around all-day kindergarten. And then the question was brought up, just kind of a concern about do you need a referendum for maintenance? And so I think there needs to be some communication about school funding and how you use referendum and these types of dollars for maintenance and for facility needs. So potential referendum overall, comments and concerns. This is what we heard back from the community. So questions asked of the district, and these will play into the district's next steps as well. So what's being done to educate the full community? We need communications. Could there be another phone poll? And then again, just like the yin and yang that Marcia mentioned before, number 4 is a great example of that. You've got people saying, don't rush this, take your time. And then you've got people saying, you've worked on this long enough. And we know everybody knows what we want and need here. Let's move ahead. There were people who specifically mentioned a referendum, and we didn't ask about an actual referendum date or a ballot measure, but people were definitely split on timing when it did come up. So this is just kind of a general theme. You can see it gives a nod to the work that needs to be done in order to put a measure onto a referendum. And now Marcia's going to talk about the exit survey.
So if you remember, the people who attended the 4 community meetings were sent an exit survey, which meant that 209 people were invited to take the survey. If you're wondering why the people who attended the small group meetings weren't sent an invitation, first they saw a shorter version of the presentation, so they wouldn't have been able to respond to all the questions. Second, there was actually some overlap, so we didn't want people to have the opportunity to take it twice. 140 people responded, which is a 67% response rate, which is, for anybody who's done any kind of polling, pretty darn high. It really goes to demonstrate that the parents who attended these community meetings are highly motivated and interested in this topic. So we talked about who attended the meetings. This tells us 73% have students enrolled in District 205. The column on the right is how does this look compared to the general population. 30% of people have students enrolled in District 205 in all of Elmhurst. 69% female versus 52% female for the general population. 72% aged 35 to 54, which is approximately 62% in the general population. Half of them attended a school-specific meeting, which we just talked about. A third have children who haven't started kindergarten yet, which is a great turnout. And interestingly, a third lived in the Lincoln attendance area and a quarter lived in the Jefferson attendance area. So you're kind of overweighted in the opinions of that part of your community. So one of the questions that we asked is, to the people who attended the meeting, is it clear why the district is making facility improvements at this time? And we asked this question to gauge if the rationale that was presented at the meetings in the information that Dr. Moyer presented and what they'd read and seen is compelling. So this doesn't mean that everyone would support a referendum, because that's more of a personal decision based on things that include boundaries, based on your own personal financial situation and maybe some other personal beliefs. But it does say that when people hear the story, they understand why the district might be going out with something like this. And that's really pretty compelling if you think about what people knew about the facilities from the general phone poll.
Right, yeah, there was
So-
a lot less understanding around the
Yeah.
need for additional funding in the broader community in the fall.
Yeah, so that's kind of a nice thing to see. We asked people next to indicate how important each of these plan components was. They were not asked to rank or prioritize these, so people had the option to say that they were all very important to them. But again, it gives us a little bit of a insight into what people think is important, and I think it aligns pretty well with what we know from what we've heard from the community and what we see and hear in other districts. So safety and security, no surprise in our country today, that was the top priority. And that typically messages well with all voters, not just people with students in school. Maintenance and infrastructure, ADA accessibility, and then we start to tick down a little bit with future-ready learning spaces, technology infrastructure upgrades, facility parity, balanced enrollment and class size. And then we start to get into the more school-specific components. No surprise, those typically test lower, so that would be York High School enhancements, all-day kindergarten, Churchville Auditorium, and upgrading the Madison Early Childhood Center. You might be thinking, well, those all-day kindergarten numbers look a little bit different than they did in the phone poll. And we saw so many questions about, can you do this faster? Is there another way to look at this with an all-day kindergarten center? We had parents of preschoolers and literally babes in arms at these meetings who realized that their students might not get all-day kindergarten. So we think that is why that number is looking lower than you might think it would.
Yeah, I don't think this is at all indicative of overall support for all-day kindergarten. I just think that safety and security, maintenance and infrastructure, ADA accessibility are just, when you're thinking about what is the highest top priority for people looking at the district, I think that's kind of where people are who took the survey.
So when we got this graph from the survey tool, it looked a little bit like this, so a little bit daunting. So green is very important, the numbers that you just saw, and then a lot of times in research we look at the top two boxes, very important and important, so this just gives you an idea of the intensity. The ranking doesn't really change. I know the numbers are super tiny, but we just wanted to let you know that this information is available to your board packet, and if you're looking at it online, you can actually zoom in and look at the numbers better than we can see them right here. You probably noticed that Lincoln and Field, two other school-specific projects, were not included in that set of questions. It's because, first of all, that was a really long question. But second of all, you actually have a different question to ask about those. So we asked people specifically, we said, Lincoln Elementary School is 103 years old. Renovations and repairs are estimated to cost $26.5 million. We gave them the price of a new Lincoln, the differential of $6 million, and then asked them, if the district moves forward with this plan, would you support building a new school, repairing and maintaining the existing school, or don't know? And as you can see, people pretty overwhelmingly, just about 87% said that they think you should build a new Lincoln. We asked them the same question for Field. The numbers obviously are different, slightly less support, but still hovering around that over 70% support for building a new field. And then we asked them, we were trying to help you at the meetings. People stood up and said that they were in favor of moving forward, creating future-ready schools, but we really wanted to delve into that a little bit more. So we asked them using a sliding scale, so that's literally a button you can move with your cursor or your mouse. Should the district make basic improvements and repairs and keep taxes as low as possible? And they knew from attending the meetings that that actually meant that they could see an $800 reduction in their taxes. Then status quo, future ready. The district should make a long-term improvements with a future ready focus. I am aware that the most comprehensive option presented would mean a tax increase of approximately $150 on a home valued at $500,000. So what you can see is that on average, they moved that bar pretty far over to the right for a total of 81 points. So that's what that 81 is, and that's a pretty, I think it sort of speaks for itself, which is why we put the actual question and the screen grab of the survey in your packet for you. So that concludes our talking portion, and now we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, I'll start already. So, you mentioned this a little bit. Could you talk about, I mean, did we have typical turnout? I know we did it maybe a little different than you've done other places, but just talk a little bit to, are those typical numbers of responses, typical turnouts for listening sessions? Can you speak a little bit to that? Like, were we a lot of people, or not as many as you expected, or?
Right. I would say that the community meetings for this point in time, those large group meetings where we were able to mail the dates out and publicize them, I would say that that was good turnout when you don't have something on the ballot and people haven't heard. You have to really be paying attention, for the greater community. And the school site-based ones varied. It certainly wasn't a poor turnout. If that's what you're looking to discover. Definitely not a poor turnout.
You talked specifically about parity, and that comes up a lot in the community, and it's come up more frequently. Can you talk a little bit more about what parity means? And I'll give you an example. I'm trying to differentiate between parity and the same. So I'm trying to understand what the community, when they say parity, what were they thinking of?
So they were thinking that students would have similar facilities to access all of the curricular opportunities. So similar kinds of media centers, similar kinds of STEM cells, similar STEM spaces. That at no school would students be housed eating lunch in the basement, that all schools would have auditoriums. They were very clear that they understood, and in fact some question that, can we really have facility parity if we don't rebuild every building? But upon further discussion, they actually came to see that you could remodel your schools so that students had similar classroom and learning environments without the buildings looking exactly the same. A couple people brought up in their discussions that they thought curricular parity was important, and that's it's very hard for parents to see that if you only have children at one of the 3 middle schools or one of the elementary schools. So that's something that the district could talk about more to reinforce more.
And specifically, one other thing, you on the parity slide, the last point says PTAs provide different types of support. Can you talk a little bit more about what they said?
A number of people commented that it would be difficult to achieve parity if certain schools were receiving more support from their PTAs than other schools were.
Okay, and that's where I get into a confusion, because I hear same. So when I hear everyone receives the same amount or the same things, to me that's I guess I want to better understand what parity means. Because that statement right there to me sounded same.
So I think that's probably a district discussion. Parity to us means that you would offer similar curriculum or identical curriculum and materials in your buildings, and that you would have similar facilities at your buildings.
Yeah, the idea, like, if technology, that all students should have access to the same technology in each school, wherever you go to school, that you would want to have that. As well as you're looking at expanding on some maker spaces or future-ready spaces. Well, it's easy to do on a brand-new building, but so how do you go back and retrofit so that all students have that access to a maker space or a future-ready space, to make sure that they're all, as they're moving forward to go to York High School, that you've got the same education that you bring with you to high school.
Yeah, and I apologize, but I keep trying to get back to this because I'm trying to understand more, anything more, or we can garner more about parity. This has come up, and does parity mean every school has, if one school has 2 gyms, does every school have 2 gyms? Is that what parity means? Is that what the community wants? I guess that's what I'm trying to get to.
I don't think that they saw it quite at that level, because they acknowledge that the buildings have different formats now, but they would like it to be that all schools are air conditioned. We can certainly get you the notes on this, but the idea is that students would have similar learning environments is the idea of parity, and what we were trying to test for messaging and see what the community brought back to us in terms of what do you think about this? Is this a message that resonates with you? Because it could be a good communication linchpin for you. And it was the community themselves that acknowledged, in fact, that different PTAs have the ability or desire, I'm sure it's probably the ability, to contribute more at specific school buildings. So it wasn't a question that we asked, it was just something that bubbled up, and it sounds like it echoes what you sometimes hear.
So Margaret, I think the easiest way I tried to explain this when I made the presentations or when I've been asked is that these are some of the principles that are reflected in these plans. These are concepts, so obviously things get fleshed out. But things like getting classrooms out of the basements, things like making sure all buildings have a safe and secure entrance, realizing that the designs are different, but within that, future-ready learning spaces as it relates to STEM spaces, media centers, were a central focus at every school, even if it wasn't a new school, would have similar types of spaces like that. In one of the listening sessions, we became aware of the fact that Fisher does not have a stage, so we went back to the architects and we explained to them that we would like that to be included in future plans. When we start moving further along. So air conditioning at some of the schools that don't have it, those are the types of things that we were kind of talking about in our discussions.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going back to the Wordle. I thought that was very interesting. But boundaries,
for you.
sure, boundaries are the biggest word.
For sure.
And I feel like that we need to have some closure on the boundaries so we can move forward with the master facility plan. I think people are waiting to hear about boundaries before deciding whether to support the plan.
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering if that is this the right time to have the conversation about that? I don't know what.
Is it,
Okay,
do you want to have it now?
I didn't know.
Or do you want to do it? Yeah? Facilities, the whole plan, everything. What?
Go ahead.
I just think if we did it then, I'd have a little more time to think it through rather than just kind of fire it out at this point.
Well, maybe I'd like to share just some of the information I've received just through this process. We had a few options out there. I think, option A was for Lincoln School, and I met with a lot of people about that, and it seemed like it was not well supported. Also with option C, felt the same way. It wasn't a lot of support for that. Option D, I haven't heard from a lot of people about that one, so I'm just wondering if other board members have, or if we've met with that school community. I think it was Jackson School. Dave, did you meet with, I think you met with the parents?
I've heard from a couple of parents that live east of York, close to Hawthorne. I've heard from no parents in the Jackson area. We have asked the Jackson principal to talk to some of her parents, and there has not been a lot of concern expressed about that boundary area south of Butterfield. I can investigate that further if you would like me to, but when I went back and asked the Jackson principal to look into it, she talked to one parent who lived there directly and talked to her parent groups, and there has not been a lot of conversation at the Jackson school community at all about that particular part of the option D.
Well, I guess, go ahead.
Just clarify the option D, because there's two pieces for Jackson, but so can we just be clear as we talk about it?
So option A was the option that moved some Jackson parents and families north to Lincoln at the Jackson individual school meeting. Some people who lived in that particular section who did not yet have kids in school expressed an interest in wanting to attend Jackson due to proximity and some other thoughts. So the part that we're talking about for option D is the part south of Butterfield that is currently bused to Jackson. In option D would get bused to Edison instead, which would be a way to ensure that we have enough space at Jackson for all-day kindergarten and balance out some of the enrollment issues that we have that are related to class sizes across the district.
Could you provide us any more information that you can gather before the next meeting on that option for option D? Since we haven't heard a lot about that.
Yes. I can put information together for you on that. We've gone back and taken a look at some of the demographics of where different students live within some of those boundaries. We think that there are some things that we could do that can preserve that principle that was expressed to us about maintaining walking neighborhoods. So I think that some of those things are possible. If you want me to somehow or another take an extra step to try to further investigate the students that are currently bused, I can try to do that. I'm not sure exactly how I would do that, but I would try to get you information on that if I could. But essentially, we did go and revisit with the boundaries consultant to try to see if there's some ways that we could further refine that option and keep the walking neighborhoods intact.
And I think this is what you're saying, but I mean, the bus times would be, I think that's important to look at what that, the current busing, if, in that option, those kids, if they're bused then to Edison, what that looks like for them.
Yes, we did ask our bus company. They went back and investigated, looked at a couple sample routes, and it is true that the bus time for going to Edison versus going to Jackson appears in some neighborhoods like it could be about 10 minutes longer on the bus.
So on the 28th, you can have more of that on option D.
Yes.
It sounds like there's an opportunity to have, whatever letter you want to call it, a version that takes the feedback and talks about moving lines that are as far away from the buildings as possible. I mean, the common sense walkability piece. The other request would just have some definition about what we mean by grandfathering. I mean, I think there's a lot of, I don't think we're taking any kids and throwing them on a bus that are already going to a school. I mean, my understanding of this is when we talk about moving families, we're talking about moving future families, not moving current families. And I think that if that's the case, that needs to be an important thing that's discussed and also agreed upon at the board as to what our grandfathering policy is, because it becomes a much simpler communication when it's defined.
Yes, we went back and looked into that as well. We wanted to be able to address that because we know it's important to people, but when there were so many different ways you can do that kind of thing that with a lot of boundary options on the table and not necessarily a completely refined design plan and things like that, there were variables. But if we took a look at option D, and we took a look at the capacities of Hawthorne and Edison under that proposal, and then took a look at some of the things we've been investigating with walking neighborhoods and other things like that, we believe that those are the two buildings that would be affected, and we believe that we would have the capacity there where we could simply, once we know the year of the build-out, make a statement that says, or we could come up with a different provision, but just to give you an idea of your response of not affecting current students, et cetera, we believe that we can tell people that if your oldest child is entering kindergarten, then this is where you would be going without having to affect any existing families and have to get into how long out do you extend sibling options and all of those other kinds of things.
No, but I mean, I just think I want to have that discussion. I'd be curious about kind of putting that continuum. I mean, between that and between I bought a house in Lincoln School District, am I always going to be in Lincoln School District even if I haven't had kids yet? And what would that take? I mean, that's the conversation I'd like to have when we talk about boundaries is what are our options? What if we said that that's what we wanted to do? What would happen? Because that's the easiest thing to say is if you own your house now, you're in whatever district you're in. And, you know, if you sell your house, someone else buying it may end up somewhere else, but you were not going to be impacted, your kids. Again, I don't know where this goes, but we'll have that conversation. And when we start to make those statements, how restrictive does that get? And what impact does that have on how you have to draw lines?
I also think with this, it's when we talk about it in the 28th, what happens if we don't, you know, what are the consequences of not changing any boundaries? And is there any way to achieve the same goals or, you know, put that option or have that discussion, but that needs to be part of the boundary discussion as well.
Yeah, I can include all of that in an informational piece. What I'm curious about is, am I being expected to give you information on a recommendation with all different kinds of, you know, the various types of pros and cons of that might be associated with option D, or when you say the grandfathering and the different things that you want me to address in this, are you expecting me to address that for every option, or are we looking at primarily at the option D? because that changes, that changes significantly what the answers to the questions are about. I mean, some of those then, you know, some of those neighborhoods do get bused. I mean, we've talked about a lot of those things, and of course, a lot of the feedback is people are not receptive to those types of things. So, in other words, should I just focus that communication on option D, or do I go back and present something that's inclusive of all the previous options?
My thinking was that you were going to have an option that reflects the thinking and the feedback we've gotten on everything else, so that we don't have an A, B, C, D, that there's an option which enhances or respects the walkability as its core principle, that also has some kind of what does that mean for grandfathering when you drew these lines. But getting it down to one thing that we're talking to and reacting to, what your starting point is, I don't much.
Okay, so one option with what the grandfathering would look like with that option, as well as the then corresponding information about if we didn't change any boundaries, what would that mean?
Just, you know, on that slide about boundaries, if you can put that up here. There's some solid principles here that I think need to demonstrate to the community that we're serious about. Changing walkable schools, maybe not close to home, but because that impact, or that is interplay with walking. You know, if you're far away and there's a small change in your distance, but you're still far away from the new one, that probably is not as important. Grandfathering. I mean, there are principles here, and I think what we need to do is we need to tell the community, we don't know what it's going to look like now, but we're going to respect these principles that the community is telling us they value. And so I don't know if that means coming up with a specific plan that we have to have, or just simply telling the community we're going to respect these principles when if we do something.
The feedback that I've gotten from people that have contacted me directly is that they want to know what the board is intending to do before they vote. In other words, they do want to know how it affects them. They appear to be saying that I don't want you to just tell me that it's okay that my kid will be able to walk to school, and then I'm going to go and vote on something and find out later that that's not necessarily what happened. So I think, you know, obviously it's impossible for this board to say with 100% certainty what boards are going to do in 12 years from now, but I think that we could be able to give them assurances that when we open up this project that we're going to respect this particular plan. I think that's possible.
I think we should pursue option D for the 28th and make sure that the community is well aware of that option, that school community.
You can get the addresses of the people that live in those neighborhoods. You want to make sure that they're clear that that neighborhood could be affected, right? So, okay.
And as Kara said, can we relook and see, is there a possibility, another way of doing this, where there are no boundary changes?
Just to clarify, I think part of when you say option D, it does preserve, I mean, it's the one option at this point that preserves the overwhelming response of, you know, protecting the areas that currently walk would continue to walk. And if you're currently bused, you would be bused. And that seems to be the overwhelming feedback. And I have to agree that people want to know. I think we can't leave it out there. There's too much angst, and it has clouded, you know, it's hovering over the rest of the plan. And so we need to clarify so people can feel like they understand, and then we can really look at the other components of the plan. So you know what you need to do for the 28th?
I think so.
So back to the overall presentation. We got through some boundaries discussion. What other, I don't know, comments, questions? What do we want to know more about?
I am curious, a conversation that came up with all-day kindergarten, okay? So that you brought that up, and I saw here that some portion of the community, and I'm trying to get to it real quick, wants to do it quicker and asked about all-day kindergarten centers. And I know that was initially brought up very early on, and a lot of people had angst about that in neighborhood schools. So I'm wondering if you can give us some of the feedback from the community on how this came up and what their thoughts were about this.
So the angst and the push or the question about a center was completely centered around the timeline. People learned at these meetings that potentially no one who is born today could go to all-day kindergarten with the timeline that was presented to them in these meetings. They would like to see all-day kindergarten faster so that their current infants and toddlers could take advantage of it. And so a solution that was proposed at meetings and by people in the audience was, could this happen faster if you did an all-day kindergarten center?
Marcia, I think though that that's part of it. I think that's a part of it, but I think the other part of it is the boundaries. I think that when people realized that their neighborhoods might be some of the neighborhoods that are affected and other things like that, then it was kind of, well, maybe a center doesn't sound so bad too. So I think I'm saying that because I agree with Shannon, and I think somebody else made this statement. I think that the conversation gets more focused when the boundaries issue kind of gets on the back burner instead of the front burner. But I can address issues with the center, and I did look into we had a meeting last week. We asked the bond, Elizabeth, we asked architects, we asked construction managers to go back and look at what would an accelerated timeline look like to address these concerns. So those are things I can speak to either now in general terms at the workshop, whatever your preference is.
Thank you. And maybe we can talk about that more at the workshop. I guess what I was trying to get at, and trying to understand where the community, what their thoughts are and where they want to go. And I guess I recall distinctly hearing before neighborhood schools and the importance of neighborhood schools.
Yeah, in the poll that we did in the fall, we asked the question about all-day kindergarten, and the support was at almost 70% for all-day kindergarten. Specifically at neighborhood schools. And we did ask about boundary changes, but we didn't have that timeline information. But ultimately, even with a little bit, it dropped a little bit with boundaries. But overall, what we saw in the fall was you're at about 70% of the community in favor of all-day kindergarten at neighborhood schools.
I mean, I guess and I don't want to go back and rehash everything, but I mean, there's enough questions about all-day kindergarten, about what it meant, what's the support given the details that we have now. We get back to cost, fee versus free. I think that free was, but again, the trade-offs that we've now somewhat more well-defined, the speed of, we talked about neighborhood schools doing it versus a center. I mean, is there a way to go back on just this topic and ask some of those questions we asked before in light of what's happened since then? Because the last time those questions were asked were a year and a half ago. How quickly could we, or who would we target, or how would we get more specific feedback in revisiting that question?
Yeah, so it was last fall that we did a telephone poll and we asked questions about all-day kindergarten. And it was overall general on the concept of all-day kindergarten was at 81% of the community in support. And just a reminder, that was just 30% parents. So you're looking at a much broader picture. We could certainly can certainly go out into the field with another poll and ask the same question, see if anything has changed.
Maybe be on a phone. I mean, I'm going back more toward the Focus 205 sessions where those things were discussed and lacked some context necessarily because it was a broad conversation at that time, and gathering more feedback in a group setting. I mean, I know we're kind of running on a lot of fronts here, but that's a question to the board is, do we want to revisit that question again because it's such a core piece of this, or do we feel like we have enough information on it around where the community's head's at to make a decision or a path?
My take is that, is that I think we need more information from the community. And one piece that I'm thinking about is some sort of question around, we've got the early childhood center, then if we did a kindergarten center, and then you've got the other kids in the family that go to an elementary school. I mean, really, we need to pose the question so that the parents can look at it as, are you really saying that you're okay with going to 3 different places for your family if that's the case? Because I don't think that, I wouldn't have thought about it, but I have recently thought about that. You see what I'm saying? Because we want things grandfathered, we want neighborhood schools, we want this, but what does it really mean practically to them day to day? And put it into those terms so that we can get a realistic response back. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I guess I'm a little concerned too with, we agree on one approach to get it done now for a certain group of people, and then once those folks are through, then there's a bunch of folks going, what the heck were you thinking? This is crazy. I'm going to 3 different schools at the same time. So again, getting that feedback or finding some way to get input.
I'm in favor of that feedback, but I'd like to get that feedback after we have any kind of boundary adjustments behind us and well communicated. Because I'm sensing in priority order, it's boundaries followed by all-day kindergarten. And people's opinion on all-day kindergarten is influenced by any kind of boundary changes that may affect them. So let's get that behind us first if we really want accurate information about that we seek.
And with that, and I don't know if you got some of this feedback, but I guess I'm just curious, there is we hear some negativity, against all-day kindergarten, people who aren't supportive. And I guess I'm curious what, because you don't have to take advantage of it, right? So there are lots of things we offer in this district to students, but you don't have to, you don't have to participate in sports just because we offer them. And that would be the same thing with all-day kindergarten. So did you get any sense of why the people who don't support all-day kindergarten don't support it?
So I didn't get a sense from looking at this limited data that people don't support all-day kindergarten. They want all-day kindergarten sooner. It was not a sense that they didn't support it. And of course, part of that is reading between the lines of these thousands of comments. And you are correct that people don't have to take advantage of it. But as long as you're looking at the list of things that you're going to need to answer, you're going to also have to think about when you do implement all-day kindergarten, how that's going to play out with the half day and the full day. It's just like another little wrinkle that we have touched on but not talked about recently. So my sense, though, from looking at this data, being in more than half the meetings and taking the opportunity to talk to people, particularly the ones who are holding their babies, is that people are most concerned as Dr. Moyer said, about the boundaries and the timeline. So they could find themselves not having all-day kindergarten and having their school change. And it's hard to garner support for a plan with those kind of really broad uncertainties.
Just anecdotally, I mean, some things I hear about all-day kindergarten, or for someone that maybe has their youngest is 15, like they think, well, is this going to cost a lot of money for me? My kids are older, or I don't have kids in the district, so they're not sure of what the impact is for them. But I also think, agreeing with Jim, like if we give people a package of, the boundary information is there, along with the facility plans, and the all-day kindergarten is part of that, people can look at the whole package and decide, versus just asking about all-day kindergarten.
I can hog the microphone here. I just had a couple more things just on the communication side. Help me read this on the priorities page with the percentages at the tail end of this. Like, there isn't one. Yes, that one. Safety and security, maintenance, ADA, accessibility, all well north of 50%. Those are pretty, meat and potatoes, blocking and tackling. I ran out of metaphors.
That's okay. I will tell you that those test well in every district.
Can you turn on your mic, please?
Those test well in every district amongst all demographics, even against likely no voters. Those all test really well. Like, we could have told you that without asking people that, just so you know.
Right. So, so how does that square with the focus on future ready? Or is it mutually exclusive or not? Or how does that... I mean, it seems like that dial says 81, but yet the weighting seems to say, get your stuff done now, the basic stuff done. And I may be reading that wrong. I just want to understand how to...
There were no timelines. We just asked people which of these components are important to you. And it's really, I'll try and look at it all the way from here. Because typically you'd look at sort of the intensity, so the green box plus the blue box
right
on this. So...
and that comes pretty close to aligning with the first page, I think, if I did it right when I was looking at it before.
It would. It definitely would. But you can see some differences. Like Madison's a great example. Only 19% of people said it's their top box important, but look how many people said it's important. Not very important, but important. So some of the things start to level off there. Future ready, if we look at it here, might not have been the most intensely green, but it tops out, if you look at the top two boxes, at over 80%. It's this one.
Right, but still below maintenance. I mean, again, if you add them both together, I mean, you get safety and security, you've got maintenance, you've got accessibility that are still the top ones. So I mean, the ranking doesn't change all that much. I'm just saying that all through this it says we're ready to go, ready to go, ready to go, future, future, future. And then I look at this and saying, but I'm really most concerned about things that may not cost that much.
I have not memorized your plan to know how much maintenance is. $26 million, actually. Those are always going to be your top three messages with voters, especially these days, safety and security. It's hard to say no that that's not important.
I understand, but then how do you get that incremental money above that? So if everybody likes that piece, and we can do that for, it's more than, I know it says 26 in here, but I think by the time you get going on this, it's going to be more than that.
Right, and we've
so how do you ask for another
about,
$100 and some million on top of that?
So some people also asked, and that's the great thing about this kind of qualitative research where you can really have a conversation with people. A lot of people asked, could you do safety and security first? Could you just build a secure vestibule at my school? And we went back, we talked to the architects, and that's actually at one point they presented sort of this slide that looked like dominoes. I don't know if you remember that one, but it basically said there's things that are related to each other. You can't just tack on a secure vestibule.
Right,
There's
you waste
other
a bunch
things
of
that
money
have
easily.
to happen to the building. So I would use this really more to think about messaging. So when you go out, you can't list 27 things in every postcard about what this plan is going to accomplish. So I think you would be well served by saying it's going to improve safety and security, it's going to improve ADA accessibility, our buildings are going to be future ready, and I think you could wrap that up also with technology that tested relatively high. So I think really what you're testing here isn't how do you get people to vote for the bigger plan. You're hearing which parts of the plan, which components are most compelling to them, and you would probably want to emphasize those in your communications when you are trying to sell the bigger plan.
Okay, because I'm just trying to figure out whether you do something that's $80 million or something now and then come back and ask for the rest. Or, I mean, I seem to hear that everybody wants the big one now. But if we didn't, we'd have big problems because these are the people that are supposed to say that. Right. I mean, this is our home team. We're playing on our home field. These folks are our fans.
Right, but it's only, I can't remember exactly how many people took the poll. I don't want you to put too much emphasis on this because let's remember it's, I think, 147 people who answered this question.
Right,
Yeah.
but if we can't win these folks over, then we've got nowhere to go.
Or then let's go back to that slider bar where they slid their slider over to the 81 in terms of being supporting future-ready learning.
Right, and that's why I was trying to reconcile with this. But I guess then that's the next question I had, which was just, okay, so take that now with playing on your home field out to everybody else. What kind of support what kind of decline in support or what changes when you get to the broader community? So we have a lot of really excited people that want to get this done right now. What would you expect to see when you start to get out to folks that aren't as engaged here?
Right, great question. Definitely don't have a crystal ball, especially when we don't have all of the plans fully
But, I mean,
fleshed,
historically,
but-
when you've done this for other districts, what kind of intensity drop-off do you find when you start to get to the broader audience?
I don't think that there's a predictive number for that, but Leslie can address how we can find out more about what the broader community thinks, so we can answer that question.
Yeah, and I have a copy of the phone poll from last fall, and just the highest, the message that scored the highest was 77%, was to create more opportunities for students related to science, technology, engineering, and math, also known as STEM.
Sure.
So that future-ready concept does resonate with the whole community, I believe, from the data that we saw, last fall. I think this is before we had a lot of detail, so I would like to test. I'd like to take some of the information that we have here and go out to the larger community beyond parents to know those answers. But I don't know that we have that data right now. I know what you're asking.
Right. So
where's that cap? Where's the sweet spot for it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what's
Yeah.
helpful now is just now that we've kind of come through this stage and hit this milestone, what's next? How do we get to that broader group? And I don't know whether that's discussed now or coming up.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say one thing do you think that the future ready piece too, it's a little bit harder for people to wrap their head around? Like even people that were there that are engaged and were excited said, I don't really, they couldn't picture how, an old school, they got how a new school could be made future ready because it's brand new, but they had a hard time wrapping their head around an old school being future ready. And do you think that plays into that where they just don't understand, they're not sure how to rank it or just?
I mean, that's certainly part of the work that will have to be done once you know what is going to be on a referendum, is the informational side of making sure people do understand what does that look like, bringing people in to help kind of walk through what those spaces might look like. It is a very abstract, idea right now, and so yeah, what does it really mean, and I think it'll have to be drilled down, but what does it mean for students and their academic success? So yeah, I mean, I think that maintenance is very easy to understand, safety and security is easier to understand, and we'll have to do a really good job explaining what the goal is in creating future ready schools.
Right, and I would sort of tag onto that and say, when we talk about future ready, we would probably want to include terms like STEM and technology to help people understand that more abstract term. So one thing that we've learned from this is that STEM tests really well, but future ready on its own doesn't test as well. So that would be a way we could incorporate this information into messaging.
Okay. And just two quick odds in it. One, Malia and Jenna, thank you for that raw data sheet. Really helpful to be able to see the individual entries, and that was what I was asking for, so I appreciate it. The last one's for Dave as we come to the meeting on the 28th. I would like to have a conversation about what the plan means for the capacity of these buildings. And pretty much around, what if we're wrong? What if our projections on enrollment, I mean, I don't think we can propose, like we talked about earlier, I think those statistics work on a district level, but on a building level, they tend to be off a bit. And I'd just like to understand, so if we're doing 4B, whatever, whatever we're doing, Lincoln Field, what other capacities when we talk about the boundary adjustments? I mean, that gives some of the why to it. Are we at 70%? Are we at 80%? How far? I mean, I think you've spoken to that to us, but I'd like to have that conversation on a building by building basis as we talk about capacity, because I know we've had that question at Fisher too. I mean, I think we need to have that conversation about, given the programming that's going into these buildings, for each building, where are they going to be when we're done?
Yeah, to follow on Chris's point, I have to believe if you announce, 5 years in advance that you're building a new school or two, given the propensity for tear downs in Elmhurst, that, I'm just going to guess that those one or two new school communities might see an extra number of teardowns and might become very popular places to build a new house. Does White or anybody have any kind of experience or expertise? I think that would be a great question to have answered in what's been their past experience in a situation like that. I'd love to hear about that on the 28th, if you can find anybody with experience in answering that question.
Okay, we'll look into that and try to get that. I think generally speaking, you see what you're predicting, but, in terms of having some personal experience or actual data to explain some experiences that districts have had when they've opened new schools, I'll look into seeing if we can get anything for you.
Thank you.
Clarification on that, and not just districts where they have the property that they can add, but in communities like ours where it is a tear down, that's really the option.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about so a comparable community, and what I'm thinking about in my own head and trying to answer that question is, I don't think there's been a lot of new school construction in recent decades. And the ones that I'm aware of, are places like Huntley that we're expanding and building campuses, which is what you're trying, so it's tricky, so we'll have to try to find out.
Well, I just was going to say that the thing that exactly what you're saying, you open this new school potentially, and everyone, you can't manage class size because you're at capacity. And so how do we, I guess, prepare for that, communicate that,
I want to go back to the Chris's question too about understanding what the community is really telling us about what they would support. Back on page What We Heard, can you recap or give us a little bit more information about what you heard about the last bullet, which is tax impact?
Sure. I have to say, we heard surprisingly little about tax impact given the size of the project. So surprisingly little. When we asked people at those table groups after their discussions, which option they supported, it was generally almost unanimously for B. Lots of chatter about that $150 a year really wasn't that much money in general. But there were some comments in the more private SurveyMonkey where people did say, please keep my taxes low. This is a very big project. So nothing statistically significant, even in terms of the number of overall comments. And it is hard, to compare the data that you get from these two radically different instruments. But I would say in general, because I know people have asked us for comparisons, I can say that way more concern about boundaries and keeping kids walking to school and considering an all-day kindergarten center than taxes in general. And I think that's a pretty private thing. Most people don't want to stand up in front of a group and say, I can't afford that, or I don't want to pay for that, whichever their choices. Great question to test with a poll.
Yes, and when we polled last fall, we asked the question, would you say that property taxes in your area are too high, too low, or about right? 57% saying overall too high, with 41% at that much intensity, and 38% saying about right, and 0% at too low. And this is also a question that's asking about property taxes in general. We can also ask about property taxes when connected with education and see if there's a difference there as well.
So that's exactly what I was getting at. But I guess what I would say, again, can we resolve some of the issues like boundaries, all-day kindergarten, or at least boundaries before we talk about the tax impact? I think that was the really hot topic. That's what was on people's minds when we went out there. And so if that's off the table, then would the tax impact be a higher priority? So I guess that's what I was wondering, if we could add additional questions so that we can understand. And at Leslie, the word you used was push points. And that's what I think would be helpful for us to know, is what's the community's push points with respect to tax impact and what we're asking for.
Or what?
What we think we're hearing from the community.
Right.
Chris, were you asking, where, how else you can get feedback now that we're at this point? Did you start to say that and we kind of...
No, it was really just about next steps. I mean, we talked to a very small group of folks, and we're really just trying to identify landmines amongst those that should support this. And I think we've gotten through that and identified the issues that need to be addressed. I don't think there's anything here that would dissuade us from moving to the next step. And then the question is just not how do we get beyond that? Because I know the folks that I know that don't have kids in the schools. Oh, by the way, we're working on rebuilding every building. What? So, I mean, they're generally supportive when you start to talk to them about why it is, but they're not paying attention. And so, how do we build that intensity with them as well, educate them? How do we get to them and understand what issues they have? That's kind of more the question.
Yeah, I was wondering, do we want to do next steps first before we answer sort of the communication side of it? Or should we answer the communication side of it?
Yeah, so there's a number of next steps for you all to kind of put into place before I think we can really launch a full communications campaign, which is exactly what we'll do. When we have the data and information, we'll come up with a plan working with the district in partnership, because you're right, you've got your kind of core team of parents, and we hopefully will have their support, but they're only 30% of your whole community. So we'll look at different ways to do mailers, community meetings, really going to where people are, kind of call those natural meetings. So, if it's a Rotary meeting or if it's a breakfast at a senior center, really just talking and listening and saying, here's what we're looking at, and here's why this ask is being made, and why we think that we need this for our students to succeed. So we'll gather the data, kind of come up with messages and how we talk about it, find people to serve as spokespeople, and then kind of go out in the community and really do due diligence to make sure that everyone understands what the what the ask is.
And what's the timeline on that?
It depends. It's one of the next steps that you all have to decide is what your
Will we know
timeline is.
before we vote to put it on the ballot?
Would you know what?
The reaction, will we have more due diligence from the broader community before we have to vote on whether to put it on the ballot?
What the next phase would really be is communications of the plan, rather than engagement. I don't believe that there's enough. If you're looking at November timeline, we would have to talk about what kind of engagement you would be looking at.
Could you address what kind of data, what other data could you get us if we moved to, like if we were putting something on the ballot in November, what other data, I think this is maybe what you're asking, what other data could be gathered from the community?
We could do a statistically valid telephone poll of the larger community, which is a data point to get some of these questions answered, test messaging, and look at that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what is the data set that we have in front of us to make the decision on whether or not to put this on the ballot. And is this it, or are there additional pieces of information that we'll get? Because, I mean, everybody wants to have more information. At some point in time, you have to make a decision. I get it. I just want to know when we stop and make a decision and then move on from there.
So if the board would like us to do a phone poll, we've done some preliminary work to start gearing up for that possibility. We could have something ready to go after your board workshop that would allow us to get you information at the July board meeting, correct? So we talked about that as being something that could give you another piece of information where we could specifically start to test some things that might come out of that board workshop that you want to know, new versus renovated field possibly, or the push point on money, which option or which dollar range people are comfortable with. We've got a draft question that the attorneys are putting together so that they could look at what a potential draft question would look like for one of our future ready scenarios. And then we could develop test questions off of that to get some quantitative information about some of the things you're asking that the board might want to know before it makes its final decision. Does that help?
I think so. I mean, I guess in my mind, and then I'm thinking that when we meet on the 28th, that coming out of that, we're going to start to define what it is we're going to ask. Right. I mean, it's not going to be 4A, 4B, 3A. It's going to be, hey, 4B or probably 2 or something. I don't remember the one that was just the maintenance piece. But and then coming out of that, it would be helpful once you tell me whether this is the right thinking, but once we've picked a way or a path to have you guys go look, now that it's defined more, to the broader community, particularly if it's 4B and it's $160 plus million, before we get to whenever the board vote is on it. But we have to give you guys something other than here's 6 scenarios to try. Here's the one that I think we're leaning towards, and here are the implications of it. So my understanding is that the goal of the 28th is to get to that.
Correct.
And then have further data on that, and then be prepared to vote or not.
And just a clarification on the timeline, so that's exactly right. The best poll is one where we're testing sort of one package or with different messages around it. The earliest we could get you data would be the first week of August, looking at the current timeline.
Trying to get a sense of what impact does it have that we are trying to gather data, or does it have any impact that we're gathering data about these topics not in the school year, during the summer months?
Yeah, so community engagement you need to do during the school year, which was the presentation that we tried to cover today. But gathering data from a phone poll is a little bit different because we can do landline and cell phones. We can even do some of them the interviews guided online so we can make sure that we get a representative sample group. So it's definitely harder in the summer. Like, for instance, we won't poll the full week of July because July 4th, because we know that people are out of town. It's difficult. When we last did your poll, the Cubs were doing really well, so we had to extend our time because we couldn't call during a Cubs game. So we definitely look at timing, and it might take a little bit longer, you're right, in July to try and get, because we really have to get the right number of women, men, really representative groups. So, but we can do it. We can do it on that fact. That's gathering data. Whereas community engagement, that's definitely a different story, and you're right. That's something that it's very difficult to do when you're not in the school year because people aren't really tuned in.
I just had clarification, Dave, when Chris was talking about capacity and percentages, if we can get student numbers counts as well, not just overall capacity percentages.
Yes.
Okay, anything else? All right, I think that's it. Thank you. Looks like we're going to take a 5-minute reset or 3-minute recess. Okay, we're going to resume the meeting. We are ready for the public comments portion of the meeting. The board will receive public comments for up to 3 minutes concerning items on this agenda, as well as communication, petitions, reports from citizens, or representatives of other public agencies. So as a reminder, when your name's called, there's a timer that'll beep quietly at 3 minutes, and we ask that you wrap up your comment at that time. So we will start with Amy Druno.
Hello, thanks for pronouncing my name right. I'm Amy Druno. I've been an Elmhurst resident for 17 years, proud parent of 2 former Lincoln Lions, now moved on to Bryan and York. I'm here to speak about the proposed boundary changes that are part of the master facility plan, and specifically to urge you to take option A off the table. If you've driven or walked around the Lincoln neighborhood lately, you've surely seen all of the orange and blue ribbons around our trees. We've done that in an effort to show our support for our neighborhood schools, specifically Lincoln, and keeping our children walking to these schools. Option A proposes that a significant section of the current Lincoln community would be forced to move their children to Hawthorne. These are children who can currently walk just half a mile to Lincoln without crossing any major intersections. The boundary change would require them to leave their neighborhood school and travel up to 1.5 miles to Hawthorne, crossing railroad tracks, St. Charles Road, and Spring Road in the process. If you've ever been in that area right around York High School during the time that school starts in the morning, you've seen how congested and dangerous it can be for anyone, especially students. I can't imagine any parents feeling safe letting their kindergartners through 5th graders ride their bikes or walk that route, while close to 3,000 high school students are trying to get to York, not to mention all the other morning traffic and possible trains. This just isn't safe for our children. Students would have to be driven or bused to Hawthorne, increasing that congestion. There's also the cost of busing all of the children to consider. In addition to the safety issues, we need to consider the effect on the health of our children and the environment driving or busing them to Hawthorne would have. Our schools and teachers and parents alike all try to encourage healthy habits with walk or ride to school days, so how would this option be supporting that message? We residents who live in that area that would be affected by option A bought our homes there with the understanding that our children would be able to walk to our neighborhood school. Being so close to the award-winning Lincoln School was definitely a big selling point for us. Forcing our families out of our neighborhood school community would have a negative impact on our property values. With boundary changes, you can grandfather students, but you can't grandfather property values. Elmhurst as a whole is a wonderful city with residents that value neighborhood elementary schools. Children who are able to walk today should continue to be able to walk tomorrow. Please, I urge you to remove option A and the boundary proposals from your consideration. Thank you.
Okay, Jennifer DeBosher? Sorry.
Hi, everyone. I have, in May, my son graduated from college after going to Conrad Fisher in Churchville in York. And then in May, my daughter graduated from York after following that same path. So I'm very lucky. So the main part of my message, or one part of my message, is to say thank you to all of you. I think I live in a wonderful district. I appreciate you all hiring great educators. My kids have been allowed to take advantage of different opportunities and hear different things and see different things. And I don't know if they would have had that elsewhere. So I want to especially thank the board, because you guys don't get paid for that. You guys just have a passion for educating our kids and helping with these tough decisions that you're hearing today and every day. And I think you should be valued, and I appreciate your time. As an advocate of Fisher, my daughter, my youngest, just finished second grade. She had a wonderful teacher, Mrs. Nugent, and all the teachers at Fisher, my experience has been, they've been wonderful. I'm excited about dual language, and so I think to not make Fisher regress in different ways, and meaning like art on a cart or things like that, we need more classrooms. So 4 classrooms would be awesome. I think Fisher will make dual language work. I think between Jane Bailey and her staff, they've talked about it for years. I know it can work. I know there's many of us that are behind it, but I think they just need the practicality of more space. So if that could be considered, and thanks for also recognizing that we need a stage. Okay? Thanks. Happy summer.
Okay, Monica Daniel. Thank you. Can't read the writing, sorry.
Well, thank you very much for you as a board listening to us as the parents and families. And as somebody who's new to Elmhurst, coming from the city, Elmhurst was one of the reasons we came was because of this school district. Being in the city and paying for private school and seeing the opportunities that I think Elmhurst offers to our children was a driving force for us to move out here. At the same token, it was also a driving force for us to be able to have our kids walk to school. So I am in support as well with Amy and many of the other parents. And as you drive down Berkeley, I think you can see all the lovely ribbons we have placed in support of the please don't make our kids be bused, to let them walk to their current local schools. It also, just as a new parent, I think it has built relationships for our children. Coming in and not having any friends, they've been able to meet so many of their classmates being able to walk to school. So again, we are just really in support of please don't move those boundaries. Let's leave things the way that they are, and we appreciate you taking the time to listen to what we have to say.
Okay, would anyone else, right there, yeah.
Okay. So I would like to touch on 3 different points, actually. I'm Grant Hartledge, a former student at York Community High School. 1, I hear all of this talk about the borders of the school districts and of the delineations between schools, and I don't really understand
in a sense, why we have to have these borders. How about instead have individual parents decide what school they think is the best, is the most convenient to get to from their location? That seems a much more sensible idea than drawing up borders on a map. The second thing is, as a former student, I understand why you all value security, but all the precautions that they've made in the past to try and increase security, they can become burdensome. Like for instance, the lanyard policy. It was incredibly annoying that they implemented on us in last year, and it just. I don't want too much burden on the students. And third is I find 7 section C to be incredibly scary. The approval to authorize destruction of verbatim recordings of closed section minutes. It sounds like a hallmark of an unaccountable body that wants to deliberately hide things. And it also sounds not only destructive to the ends of our community school district, but also to the universe in itself, because as unique information is deleted, entropy is increased, therefore decreasing the lifespan of the universe. I really urge you not to destroy the recordings of the closed section. There. I yield my time.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I think we came too early, so I missed this time.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
My battery's going to die, so hopefully I'll make it quick.
Meredith Vogel, representing the Jefferson School community. On behalf of the Jefferson School community, we appreciate the work the board and the district is doing with respect to the master facility plan. We do believe that many of our questions have been answered. However, we continue to be concerned that there are still many unanswered questions. Specifically, there are unanswered questions regarding the capacity issues. The last external demographic study was done in 2014. This feels outdated, given the significant decisions that need to be made. When we asked the district regarding our capacity questions, we did receive some information internally, and the numbers do not jive. We understand that each option has not been fully vetted with specific details, and the detailed questions we asked will not be looked at until an option is selected. We believe a sufficient analysis should be done. I want to make note that the Jefferson School meeting occurred before the district shared the boundary adjustment option C. This is very concerning to us, and we feel second meeting when we asked should have occurred. Our Jefferson community is not supportive of option C. We have surveyed and walked door to door throughout our neighborhood, and we will be leaving behind a petition against option C. Every single household we spoke to signed the petition and is against option C. I'm happy to provide you a copy of the petition today that includes over 150 household signatures, which include many retirees, outgoing district families, current District 205 families, as well as future district families who have not entered into the district yet. Option C doesn't seem to help the Lincoln capacity issues. It doesn't maintain natural boundaries. There are security issues walking to Edison, among other things that are outlined in our petition. I'm hopefully that the board have seen some of the pictures we've sent over with respect to our children walking across a flooded prairie path. Our final comment, many families are already taking their children to schools, to multiple schools today. I heard some discussions on all-day kindergarten. As 2 full-time working parents, I have gone to 3 schools for 2.5 years, preschool, daycares, private kindergarten, because I could not get all-day kindergarten, and also elementary schools. And people continue to do that as well as they move on to middle school and high school. So don't look that that's not happening already today. We strongly recommend that the board vet the issues we've laid out so we can move forward with the boundary decision. And we really appreciate your time.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is the approval of board meeting minutes from May 21st, 2018 and May 22nd, 2018. Are there any changes? No changes, then the minutes stand as presented. We also need to approve the May 21st, 2018 and May 22nd, 2018 closed session minutes. Sorry, I think I missed that. Any changes? Okay, minutes stand as presented. On to superintendent's agenda, consent agenda. Would anyone like to pull off any items?
I would like to remove item 7C for discussion.
Thank you.
Second. We're not. Now I need a motion, so we've pulled off item C.
I move that we approve the consent agenda, items A, B, D, E, F, G, H, and I.
Second that.
Okay. Any discussion?
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes?
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes. 7 ayes, no nays. Consent agenda passed.
I'd like to table item 7. Items.
Second.
I'd like to table item 7C.
Vote, please.
Can I just ask why?
Yes.
I wanted to go through and take a look at the this is my thought. I'd like to go through and take a look at the information and just to make sure that that information was approved in open session. Those meeting minutes were approved in open session.
Thank you, Margaret. Other discussion? Vote.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yep.
Mr. Bloom?
Sure.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes. Ayes, no nays. We are ready for Superintendent's Agenda Action Item. A, approval of resolution directing the school treasurer to transfer funds from the Operations and Maintenance Fund to the Capital Projects Fund in an amount of $1.2 million for summer 2018 maintenance projects.
So can we just get a motion, and then Chris can address any questions you might have during discussion? Does that work?
Sure, I'll do the motion. I recommend that the Board of Education approve the resolution of the Board of Education directing the school treasurer to transfer funds from the Operations and Maintenance Fund to the Capital Projects Fund in the amount of $1,200,000.
Second.
Discussion, questions?
Probably be a good idea just to have the appropriate representative of the administration explain what's going on here.
This is to take the money out of operations and maintenance, out of an operating fund, into the capital projects fund to fund this summer's projects, which include tuck pointing at York, Emerson, and Jackson, roof project at Sandburg and York, the blacktop at Jackson's entrance, abatement at Madison, 2 interior downspouts at Hawthorne, a boiler at York, a chiller at Field, and the manufacturing lab renovation at York this summer.
Thank you.
If there's no discussion, you can vote.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yep.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes, 7 ayes, no nays, motion passes. Item B, approval of athletic trainer, NovaCare.
So on this next one, I'm going to let Chris explain this item to you, and so take it away.
This is an extension of our contract with our athletic trainers with NovaCare. They provide a great service for our students and our coaches, providing athletic training. This is a 2% increase in the first 2 years, and I think it goes down a little bit in the third, fourth, and fifth year. The 2 trainers have been with us for 5 years. The athletic director is very happy with the service that they provide. This will give some continuity there with these, to be able to stay with the same trainers that know our students and our coaches very well. Also provided the board with a survey of other athletic training contracts for your for you to compare and look to see that these are reasonable increases.
Do you have a motion, and then we can discuss?
Okay. I move that the Board of Education approve the athletic training services contract for the period June 1, 2018 through June 30th, 2023 to NovaCare Rehabilitation pending attorney review.
Second that.
Motion by Shannon, second by Jim. Discussion. John?
Just quickly, Chris, how did you come up with 5 years?
That was what NovaCare was looking for, a 5-year agreement. Could be less if you want. That's just what they were looking for, a 5-year agreement. There wasn't anything in particular about 5 years that struck me. It just provides for continuity with the athletic trainers.
Okay. we're hitting in some things, and I'm not sure we have much guidance as to why we're doing them. I don't know why we lock in for 5 years. I guess at 2%, you could say it's a good deal, but we don't really know what will happen in 2 years. The other thing is I noticed that this $45 per hour over contract, could you tell me what that is?
That comes into play when above so we have 2 trainers that work full-time at York. If there is a need for more than that, for beyond that, it has come into play in the past for certain tournaments, but those tournaments are pay for the services that are beyond. It comes into play on occasion when it's beyond the normal hours and the normal amount of time needed for the athletic trainers.
And on that criteria, we are the highest in the group, in the survey group. I guess what I'd like to do is, this needs to be approved. It's not our largest contract that we've seen here. But I think what I'd like to do is if we could get together at Finance and Operations and kind of talk about some of the standards that we apply when doing these sole source options, and kind of put some standards together so that we can show the community that there's a consistency to what we do and what we apply to the different contracts. I think that would be a real good discussion to have in a committee when it's more of an open forum and it's not 10 o'clock at night. So that's all I got.
Chris, can you share a little bit about who approves that, or what's the policy around, can it be anything over? I mean, who's accounting for that?
Well, this is a professional service. It's a professional service which is exempt from bidding law, so that but clearly we can see that the hourly cost for these employees are definitely less than what you're seeing at other schools, and the amount of trainers that we have, that this is a very reasonable service. In addition, if you talk to Rob Wagner, and he was very clear that the coaches and the students know these trainers well. And if you start bidding and changing a lot, then you get different trainers that don't know the kids, don't know the coaches, and then the service is less than what is needed for our students at York.
Understood. I guess what I'm trying to get a sense of is what's the policy, or what's the approval process for over the contract? Can we shed some light at some point anyway, if we can't tonight?
The additional hourly?
Yeah, the additional hourly over the contract. So if they're working more, I'm sure we have some policy, or there's some procedure, it's got to be approved at some point.
Karen, so what you're saying is that what's the criteria for whether or not we authorize the additional hours, right? So we got to get that question answered from Rob. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Okay.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell.
Yes.
Mr. McDonough.
Present.
Mrs. Caforio.
Yes. 6 ayes, no nays, 1 present, motion carries. C.
Okay, on this next one, Bev Redmond is replacing Malia Smith, who's retiring in, 400 hours or something like that. And the communications function in terms of a transition, Malia does have some additional days beyond July 1st, but with all that we previously approved, but with all of the community engagement that was going on in May when we set that process up, we had a lot of intense work going on in communications in addition to the normal functions. And so this recommendation is a way to provide some, or it was a suggestion here to provide not only just some additional support, but also to give Bev a good feel for what this process has been like and where the community's at, so when she takes over that the transition is relatively smooth considering the high stakes of this particular project.
Motion.
I move that the Board of Education approve up to 10 days of additional pay at a daily rate of $441.21 to Bev Redmond, Executive Director of Communications, beginning July 1st for additional days worked.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay.
Thank you, Bev.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, we have a lot of work.
And
Feels
Bev's-
like you already work here.
Yeah, Bev's been spending a lot of time with us for free, so thank you very much.
Mr. Bloom.
Yes.
Mr. McDonough.
Yes.
Mr. Collins.
Yes.
Dr. Harrell.
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner.
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen.
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio.
Yes. 7 ayes, no nays, motion passes. All right, D.
Yeah, this item was tabled from last time, so I'll let Chris introduce this.
So the contract with First Student, we went out to bid in 2015. The bid included a 3-year contract with a 2-year extension. The 2-year extension was a 2.5% increase. We've received good service from First Student, and so this is just the 2-year extension that was approved back in 2015. I also included a survey of other school districts with the bus driver, national bus driver shortage. Lots of school districts are seeing large increases in contracts because of wages and benefits for bus drivers. So the 2.5% increase with receiving good service from First Student seemed a reasonable, and it was part of the contract that was approved in 2015.
Motion.
I move that the Board of Education exercise the option to extend the original agreement and approve the extension of the contract for regular transportation services with First Student with a 2.5% increase in route and field trip rates for the 2018-19 and 2019-20 school years.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Margaret, second by Jim. Any discussion?
I just want to thank you for the rationale, Chris. That one's solid. Thank you very much.
Dr. Harrell.
Yes.
Mr. Collins.
Yes.
Mr. McDonough.
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner.
Yes.
Mr. Bloom.
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen.
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio.
Yes, 7 ayes, no nays, motion passes. Item E.
The special education transportation contract with Cottage Hill is not exactly the same as this one. Is actually just looking for a 1 year, let me see. So this is a 2.5% increase. Again, we did a survey to show the board some of the large increases that other districts are seeing. This is a 2.5% increase. And with the national bus driver shortage, a lot of school districts are seeing large increases. This is a 1 year, 2.5% increase on the Cottage Hill operating company for our special education buses. We've received good services with Cottage Hill, and so this is a 1 year contract with a 2.5% increase.
A motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve a 1-year extension of the contract with Cottage Hill Operating Company, incorporating a 2.5% increase for the 2018-2019 school year.
I'll second.
Motion by Jim, second by Shannon. Any discussion?
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes, 7 ayes, no nays, motion passes. Item F, approval of donations.
So there are 3 tonight. The first is Jackson PTA, a request $10,000 for classroom libraries and $3,000 for a Gaga pit and art supplies. I'm predicting Gaga pits are going to become popular now that Lincoln set that trend for us and Jackson is following behind. And then Lincoln request is for a subscription to a computer program called PebbleGo Next, which is a database that has various different types of reading at grade level materials to support social studies and science primarily. And then the third donation is from some football parents at York who would like to donate $1,500 to cover the cost of summer camp T-shirts.
Motion?
Okay. I move that the Board of Education approve acceptance of the donation from Jackson School PTA in the amount of $10,000 for additional books for each classroom and $3,000 to build a Gaga pit and to purchase art supplies. The donation from Lincoln School PTA in the amount of $1,011.75 for a PebbleGo Next subscription, and the donation from a group of York High School parents in the amount of $1,500 for T-shirts for the football program. These donations are accepted in accordance with Policy 880, Gifts to the District.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Shannon, second by John. Any discussion?
I'd like to thank the Jackson School PTA for their donation for additional books for the classroom. Thank you.
I also want to extend a thank you to the Lincoln School PTA for their generous donation of the subscription to PebbleGo Next.
And I'll extend a hearty thank you to the parents, the York parents who donated for the T-shirts for the York football program. Thank you.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough? Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes. 7 ayes, no nays. Motion passes. Right. Action out of closed session item. Approval of administrative reorganization proposal.
I move that the Board of Education approve the administrative reorganization proposal as presented.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by John. Any discussion?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask for a description for the people watching at home.
Okay, so this proposal would be to add a Director of Human Resources and move the existing .5 Administrative Assistant FTE from Human Resources to Research and Program Analysis. It would change Dr. Henderson's title from Assistant Superintendent to Associate Superintendent, with the rationale behind that to help coordinate the work between and among the efforts, the district office and the building level as it relates to learning and teaching and student services functions. The additional elements of the proposal would be to change Ariana Leonard's title from World Language and EL Coordinator to Director of Language Acquisition. This would help be to solidify a consistent K-12 EL program, as we've had a retirement of the current EL department chair at the high school. This is something that we think will be an enhancement to closing gaps and addressing some programming issues that occur at that grade level. It would be moving physical education and health responsibilities from Dave Beatty to Deb Lee, and changing her title from Curriculum Coordinator to Director of Curriculum.
Thank you.
I just wanted to state that the rationale for I'm going to be voting no to this due to lack of not receiving request of financial data associated with this request, a recommendation prior to this vote, and that I believe a few adjustments to this proposal would be beneficial.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I also, it's along the same lines. There's a lot of things I really support, and I just don't have all the information right now tonight for this proposal.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, pull the board.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. McDonough,
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen,
No.
Mr. Bloom,
Yes.
Dr. Harrell,
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner,
No.
Mrs. Caforio.
Yes. 5 ayes, 2 noes. Motion carries. Superintendent's communication.
Okay, again, I'm turning this over to Chris to explain this item.
David's going to put up the document on this refunding issue. We will have a resolution at the July board meeting related to this. The first column of numbers is the current debt service on our 2008 debt certificates totaling $3.6 million. The next column shows the $3,357,130. That is the estimated amount in the refunding. for a savings in the third column there of $268,245, which would be an average annual savings of $26,693. Net PV savings $232,476, which is a PV as a percentage of bonds refunded of 8.215%. So this will be coming at the next board meeting in July. This is just a small refunding.
Any questions, discussion?
One thing, just for clarification, the debt certificates were issued to purchase the building that we're sitting in today and also do some renovations at the stadium football stadium at York High School.
Freedom of information.
There's one Freedom of Information request received requesting specific information on certain employees, which was partially granted and partially denied.
Board Communications, Learning and Teaching Committee report, Mr. Collins.
Mary, I could make this extremely short, but I think if I deferred to you, it might be a little more informative.
Well, I could do a rehash of the math presentation if you'd like. Okay.
Oh, no, wait.
So Dave Beatty did a very extensive review of curricular changes to math, the results that we're seeing, and how we continue to look at making our levels, particularly at high school, more flexible for our students so they have the ability to move in and out of tracks when it's warranted and when they're seeking those opportunities. So we had a really great conversation with lots of questions asked by the 3 board members who were present. We also discussed the middle school acceleration period. We had, at the December or January Learning and Teaching Committee meeting, we had said we would regroup in the spring and talk again. So we talked about some of the enhancements that we've made to the acceleration period and reviewed the parameters for acceleration next year that a committee of 18 staff members from comprised of each of the 3 middle schools have come to agreement on. And then we also talked about just trying to dispel some misinformation that was out in the community, talking about how our elementary specials teachers are scheduled at the elementary schools and how our instrumental music lessons are scheduled at the elementary schools and who provides those lessons. So typically it's one of our full-time instrumental teachers, so our band and orchestra teachers who teach at the middle school and then also go to elementary schools. And then at times that's supplemented by some of our music teachers who teach at the elementary schools. That's a practice that has taken place previously and will continue next year.
The only thing I would add to that is regarding curriculum for the acceleration period. You've implemented more rigor, a more formal process about the curriculum that's presented during those periods, and that's great. So thank you.
Yep, we're on the right track.
Yes, and it sounds like we're getting better at every iteration. So.
Going to get a report on acceleration here?
Yes, that will be coming in July. So thank you for the preview. Yes, Mary Ann's going to do, since that was a formal program review that took place all throughout the school year, you will get the final report on that.
Any other board communications? Oh, Chris?
Not to create groans. Can I ask one question about the bonds? Chris, are those being marketed? I mean, interest rates are moving all over the place right now. My question is just, this makes a lot of sense. Do we have to wait to the vote to market the bonds?
Yes.
I know it says the refunding date's August 1st. Elizabeth, I mean, you sat through the whole thing. You might as well come up and say it.
We're hoping to privately place these bonds because the cost of issuance is about half of a full public sale. And if we do that, we'd like to do that, get bids in front of your board meeting from banks so that we will bring you a fully completed resolution on July 15th to approve. That's a goal. If the bids from the banks don't look as favorable as going to the public markets, we will probably then be to you with a parameters resolution and price shortly thereafter.
Okay, so you'll be able to, well, I guess you're just getting indications then prior to our board meeting, so you won't be able to fix interest rates?
It's possible we will if we get a good bid from a bank to take the whole thing in a private placement.
I guess my question is there anything we can do here right now, that's why I brought it up now at this time, to accelerate the process at all?
No.
I don't think so, right?
No.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
First time we're bringing it to you, so we thought we'd introduce it and then bring the resolution
All right.
next time.
Great. I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss a window given where rates are moving.
Yeah, today's
Okay,
a good day. Yeah. So.
Thanks so much.
Anything else?
Can I just say
John?
something
Yep.
about that? I'm not a finance person, but I watch what these people do, Chris included, in terms of protecting the taxpayers' interest and doing the best thing they can to get the most out of people's tax dollars. And I'm very impressed with how everybody's working together for the taxpayer. This money, as Jim likes to tell us, doesn't mean we go use it somewhere else. It goes directly back to the taxpayer. Am I right? And that's a good thing.
Okay, Karen?
I just wanted to make the announcement that I cannot be here for the June 28th special board meeting. We knew that ahead of time. I had a scheduling conflict. And so I wanted to ask, based on the conversation that we had, Dave and Kara, and some brainstorming, will that information come to the board before the 28th, or will that be part of the discussion? And how does my input into that conversation without me being here take place, specifically with regard to Jackson and Fisher?
Well, my goal is obviously to get that to you as soon as possible. So I've got to start working on that tomorrow. I don't want to drop that on people where they don't have time to prepare. So I'll try to get you at least some type of a draft concept by Friday. If I believe I should be able to, since a lot of this preliminary work has been done, a lot of it just would be organizing it into kind of a format that people can, follow. I should be able to get people something, I'll shoot for Friday.
And I was going to say we could get your notes and then those could be shared if that would work for you. You and I can work that out.
Sure, I'm out Sunday, and then I'm out of pocket.
All right, so we have 3 upcoming meetings. Thursday, June 28th is a special board meeting for a facilities workshop, 6 o'clock here. We have our regular meeting on Tuesday, July 17th, 7:30. And Tuesday, August 14th at 7:30 is a regular scheduled board meeting as well. If there's no other comments or questions, I will call the meeting adjourned at 10:31.
Thank you.